You can't go to the computer screen in most libraries and find them. They take a lot of searching. But you folks are all members of a historical society, so I don't have to tell you that it's worth the journey. Was one of the first American settlers to get into this area, and he was also one of the first 2 people to die in the war. So yeah, the McAllisters were pretty prominent around that area for a long time.
Do you know the site which Leshar was on?
Well,
I mean, flying down to this is within a few feet.
Well, I have heard it said that it's the 5th fairway of the Steilacoom, the golf course around Steilacoom Lake. There's a monument there at Thunderbird Shopping Center, and oh well, it was the 5th fairway, and I think the golf course is gone now. It's about a street back from Steilacoom Boulevard toward the lake. So I'm not sure now exactly where it was, but yeah, when there was a golf course there, they said it was the 5th fairway.
What could you tell us something about the military road, where it started and where it ended, and how that was affected by the Indians?
Oh, well, you folks may know more about the military road than I do. I know that it was built. It built several roads. One to connect Fort Steilacoom with Fort Bellingham, which is way up north. Another that across the mountains went east. I know that it came very near Fort Nisqually also. But as I understand it, at least part of the military road ran along what's now Steilacoom Boulevard, and helped give a lot of the roads here their start.
There is one in Lakewood.
Yeah, there's several places where you'll run into what's called Military Road. There's another stretch up by Kent that's known as Military Road.
Is that the same road up at Urian?
It probably is. There's probably sections of it. It's kind of like Route 66, where the stretches still survive.
Is there any major Indian encampments in the Lakewood area?
Oh, well, I've heard it said that Indians lived along Flood Creek, but I don't know that anyone has found archaeological remains. I know that a few years ago they found fire pits near the mouth of Chambers Creek. I think archaeologists from Fort Steilacoom, or from Pierce College, I should say now, had worked on that. I know that in the 1930s, there's the road that goes up from Chambers Creek up the hill. My father worked for the highway department back then, and as they were working on that road, they uncovered an Indian burial site. It was a fellow that had been buried with cedar boughs and a few beads, and they didn't know what to do with him. They put him back where they found him, and he may still be there. There was, I'm sure, a significant presence in the area. I know that the Steilacoom tribe is trying to get federal recognition as a distinct tribe of Indians, and that they lived around that area. And I've even heard that in the middle of Tacoma there was an Indian burial site somewhere in the area where University of Puget Sound is, but to try to run these stories to their source and get something concrete about them, sometimes it's very difficult.
Do you know what the status is of the Steilacoom tribe that are trying to get recognized?
I really couldn't tell. I know that they haven't set aside land for them, so that
They've got that wonderful museum,
Oh yeah, a great little museum.
So they have no recognition.
Well, part of it, I guess, with the Indians fighting for recognition as a tribe, they've not only got to fight the federal government, they've got to fight their brother Indians quite often. The tribes who are recognized and are part of the government allotments are not always keen to have that pie sliced a few more ways. So there's some argument like the Snohomish and the Snoqualmies. The Snohomish, I think, have contended that the Snoqualmie tribe was generally amalgamated into their tribe and ceased to be a distinct tribe. But there are many descendants of the Snoqualmies that hold otherwise. And I know that that fight has been going on for a very long time for recognition also. And I think that I was saying that President Clinton signed an act a couple hours too late, just as he'd gone out of office, that might have finally settled that. So it's probably going to be with us for a while. A lot of this wrangling of what constitutes a tribe and who is a member and who's going to get the recognition.
Which were the largest tribes in this vicinity in the 1850s?
Probably the Duwamish and the Suquamish seem to be the largest group. The Nisquallies, probably the Nisquallies put more into the war than any other group. I would not venture to say that they were the most populous tribe, but they probably they had the most dynamic leader. There were also other groups. There were upriver Green River Indians that more or less became the Muckleshoot tribe. That's what they're recognized as now. The Muckleshoot tribe was more of a government creation than an actual tribe from the time. I don't know. It's hard to say. If you'd been here before about 1830, it would have been a whole different proposition. There'd been smallpox, measles, and several other diseases that just decimated the tribes here. I think it's kind of like the Pilgrims landing around Plymouth. They came in because the Indians had died off there in a plague that had started from apparently a trading ship that had landed. So the whites had a lot easier time here just because the population was so much smaller than it might have been a generation before. If you ever read this oration that Chief Seattle made at the treaty signing at Point Elliott, he talks about how his tribe were, I think, once, more numerous than the sand on the beach. He said, I think, in his own lifetime, he had seen most of them die away and disappear. So there probably, as near as I can tell, there were probably about 6,000 Indians living in the war zone around Puget Sound.
Were the Indians in this area receptive to the first whites that started coming in here, or were they ready to go to war, or ready to fight, or drive them off, the whites off?
Well, generally they seem to be receptive. The first group that came in, James McAllister was part of that. It was the Simmons Party, and Leshai was one of the fellows that met them when they came in, and he invited them to become members of his tribe. So they were made welcome, and the Indians, even during the Puget Sound Indian War, they generally made a distinction between the old settlers and the new settlers. Didn't save James McAllister, because he was one of the oldest of those settlers, and he died in the first shot. But for the most part, when like the White River Massacre and other odd little killings, it was directed against the settlers who showed up within the last couple of years. So apparently there was a distinction there. And I think it was after the treaty of the Medicine Creek Treaty that things really started to sour, when the Indians started to realize what kind of land was being set aside for them, and rumors started to circulate among them about, well, they began to believe that they weren't going to really be put on this land at all. There was rumors that the government was going to load them on a steamboat and take them off to some god-awful place where it was dark all the time, and they said mosquitoes were as big as dogs and things like that. Now, how strongly they believed that, I don't know, but it did circulate among them, and it probably encouraged some of them to come into the war who might have had their doubts about this. Indians, I think most of them didn't enter the war because when you think about it, you realize as they were learning slowly the power of the white government, this Congress that could allocate $1 million to send more troops and more guns. Well, nobody was going to allocate $1 million to help the Indians in this war. And a lot of them, I think fairly early, they realized how this was going to come out. But enough of them did come in where there were about 200 Indians under arms, maybe 300 when the Klickitats came over the mountains for a while and helped out in the Battle of Seattle. For a while, they made a pretty steep fight of it. It surprised some of the officers who'd been in some pretty tough scrapes. That the Indians here put up a lot more of a fight than they had expected.
What was their types of weapons at that time, the Indians' weapons?
Well, for the most part, they had Hudson's Bay muskets. Fort Nisqually, for one thing, I do a lot of volunteer work at Fort Nisqually, and they sold smoothbore flintlock muskets there, or traded to the Indians. They'd trade for beaver furs and other types of furs. A good many of the Indians had those. A few had bows and arrows. And then, well, one of my favorite fellows from this war, he was a leader by the name of Canasket. There's a Canasket Palmer State Park now that's named for him. And he's kind of a mystery. Nobody knows much about him. He apparently came from somewhere up the Green River country, and he showed up several places, and he hated the whites with a passion, much more apparently than any of the others. Nobody's quite sure why, but he was armed, since you asked about how they were armed, he was armed with a Kentucky rifle. He was one of the few that had one of those. Kentucky rifle's it's a great thing. It's slow loading and it's heavy, but it's a very accurate piece. And he was enormously proud of this gun. He kept it polished to a high sheen, and that was his undoing. He was sort of a master of night fighting. He led several night ambushes, and I think around the 1st of March, 1856, there was a regular Army soldier on night duty guarding a camp up, I think in the White River country. And the soldier noticed that up on the ridge, every now and then he'd see a little flash of light. And he kept watching that. And finally he turned and he fired at this flash. And, well, what he'd been seeing was the light of the fire reflected off this highly polished barrel of Kanasket's rifle. And down the hill tumbled Canasket, ended up being dragged into the soldier's camp. And apparently the shot must have severed his spine because he couldn't move his legs, but he still was holding and brandishing a knife, and he was waving it at anybody that came close to him, and he was shouting in Chinook jargon, which is the only way the whites and the Indians could talk to each other then. It's a sort of a pidgin English that a lot of the tribes used even to talk to each other if their languages were different. And he was shouting, "I'm Canasket and I hate you and I always will, and you had better kill me or I will kill you." And finally one of them did. They shot him in the head, left him there. But that's been always one of the mysteries for me. I'd dearly love to know a little more about Canasket. And that's one of those things because the whites could take pen to paper, and the Indians couldn't. We probably never will. We never will know any more about him than we do right now.
I did not hear your introduction, so I do not know if you're a professor or not. How did you become interested in this subject? You're a very good speaker. It's very entertaining.
Oh, well, thank you. I was just I was lucky. I grew up here. My father was interested in history, and he had lived here since he was a boy, and he remembered things about, well, he remembered rowing ashore one day and seeing a monument near the spot where Leshai was hanged. And he told me other things that he knew enough that I got interested. And about 1974, I think it was, I finally realized when I started doing serious research, there was enough here to do a book. And that's the nice thing about our part of the world. That I think we're all